The small Terran research vessel, Prometheus, drifted quietly in the void. Its crew, a handful of scientists, had been charting an anomaly near the Orion Fringe, far from the bustling trade routes and well-traveled systems of the galaxy. It was a simple mission. No military escorts, no weapons, just data collection. The crew had no idea their routine was about to become the spark of a galactic inferno. In the cold darkness of space, the ship sent out regular updates, temperature readings, energy signatures from nearby cosmic phenomena, and routine communications. For most of the galaxy, these signals were ignored, just another blip in the never-ending expanse of space. To the Triarch Council, they were nothing but noise, until the Prometheus strayed too close to one of their patrol zones. The Council had always maintained strict borders. The fringes of their empire were carefully monitored by automated ships and occasionally their elite enforcers. These territories were guarded with absolute precision, and the presence of any uninvited vessel was seen as an intrusion, a potential threat. And to the Council, threats were eradicated with efficiency. When the Prometheus's sensors picked up a Triarch patrol ship, it was too late. The patrol had already locked onto them, identifying them as an unauthorized vessel. A single message flashed on their screen. Warning: leave the sector immediately or face elimination. The captain of the Prometheus, Captain Sarah Devlin, issued a calm response, explaining they were simply a research vessel. But the reply was swift and unforgiving. This is a military zone. You are not authorized to be here. Before the crew had time to react, weapons fire erupted from the patrol ship's cannons. The Prometheus barely had time to attempt evasive maneuvers before it was hit by a devastating blast. The ship's hull buckled under the force of the impact, and the crew was thrown into chaos. Captain Devlin screamed orders, but the controls were unresponsive. Systems went dark, and alarms blared as the ship spiraled out of control. Within moments, the Prometheus was in flames, its hull torn apart by the relentless barrage. The crew, those who survived the initial blast, tried desperately to send a distress signal. Their final transmission, barely coherent, captured the panic and desperation of the crew, voices pleading for mercy, for understanding. But it was too late. The patrol ship fired once more, and the Prometheus was obliterated, a small fragment of burning debris, lost in the cold, silent void. The Triarch patrol ship made its departure, unscathed, dismissing the incident as a minor disturbance. To them, it was nothing more than an unfortunate misunderstanding, one that would be forgotten in the endless cycle of galactic peace. But on Earth, it was the beginning of something much larger. The final transmission from the Prometheus made its way across the vastness of space and reached Earth's communications network. The footage played out for the entire world to see. The calm before the storm, the violent explosion, the haunting silence that followed. And in that silence, Earth began to wake up. The people of Earth watched as the once predictable galaxy seemed to shift. The Triarch Council's indifference echoed through the minds of millions. A spark was lit. The galaxy had just made a mistake, and humanity would make them remember it. The moment the footage of the Prometheus's final transmission aired, Earth fell silent. Billions of people across every nation, every continent, watched in horror as the ship was torn apart in space, the last screams of its crew fading into the void. It was a violence no one could ignore, a senseless act that left the world stunned and grieving. The rage that bubbled beneath the surface of humanity's fractured nations was immediate, but it wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, something primal. For decades, Earth had lived in the shadow of galactic powers that regarded them as insignificant. Humans were a young species, technologically behind, a barely noticeable flicker in the cosmos. The Triarch Council, the ancient and powerful entity that governed much of the galaxy, had seen Earth as nothing more than a primitive world with no place at the table. But this act of brutality, it shattered that illusion. In every major city, from the towers of New York to the sprawling cities of China and the heart of Europe, People gathered in the streets, eyes fixed on the screens that broadcast the horrors of the Prometheus. The silence of space had found its echo on Earth, and it wasn't just sorrow that filled the air. It was resolve. For the first time in centuries, the nations of Earth set aside their differences. The divides that had once defined them seemed irrelevant in the face of a common enemy. "We cannot let this stand." The words rang out from every corner of the planet, spoken by world leaders and common citizens alike. The United Nations, long divided, often ineffective, called an emergency summit. Diplomatic missions were sent out in a desperate bid to demand answers, to demand justice. But the Triarch Council was unmoved. Their response was cold, dismissive, as expected. They expressed regret, but no real accountability. A small human vessel had been destroyed. They claimed, but it was an unfortunate mistake. The shockwaves of Earth's response rippled across the galaxy. The Triarch Council, whose centuries-old rule had gone unchallenged, found itself struggling to grasp the enormity of what they had just ignited. Humanity had always been dismissed as inconsequential, a species barely clinging to the fringes of galactic society. Now they had awakened something dangerous: unity. The United Terran Front wasn't just a military force. It was a movement. What had once been isolated nations, divided by politics, history, and culture, were now coming together with a singular purpose. Nations that had once viewed each other as rivals were now allies in a common cause: to show the galaxy that Earth would not be silenced. The first step was the formation of a planetary coalition. The United Nations, long a symbol of fractured diplomacy, was swiftly replaced by a unified military command. Earth's most brilliant scientists, engineers, and military tacticians were called to contribute. The war effort would not just be about fighting back. It would be about showing the galaxy that humanity could stand toe-to-toe with the most powerful civilizations. But Earth didn't have the luxury of time. The Triarch Council was not idle. They dismissed the human response with contempt, assuming that Earth's newly formed coalition would fall apart under the pressure of its own internal conflicts. They underestimated the resolve of humanity. The people of Earth had always faced their greatest challenges alone. But this time, something was different. The world had united, not because of political agendas, but because of a collective wound. The loss of the Prometheus was felt by every human, regardless of background or belief. This wasn't about military might. It was about something far more potent: a drive to be seen, to be respected, and to ensure that such an atrocity would never be repeated. At the heart of the coalition was the newly formed Terran fleet, built from the ashes of Earth's industrial might. What had once been civilian ships, mining vessels, and research crafts were now retrofitted with cutting-edge weaponry and technology. They were a far cry from the sleek, pristine warships of the Triarchs, but they had something far more dangerous: the will of a species that had nothing to lose. The next phase was one of total mobilization. Earth's military assets, previously designed for defense, were repurposed for offense. Orbital shipyards were pushed into overdrive, constructing warships capable of striking at the heart of the Triarch's empire. Earth's engineers developed new technologies, blending human ingenuity with stolen Triarch tech to create weapons the Council hadn't seen before. The gap between Earth's technological development and the galaxy's elite shrank with every passing day. Humanity, once written off as a mere footnote in galactic history, was preparing for war. A war not just for survival, but for respect. And the Triarchs, far too comfortable in their power, still couldn't fathom what they had unleashed. They believed Earth's resolve would crumble. They were wrong. The message from Earth was clear, and it was becoming impossible to ignore. The Triarch Council would learn the price of underestimating humanity. No longer would Earth cower in the shadows of the galaxy. The time had come for them to be heard. The Triarch Council had been certain that Earth would fall apart under the pressure. They expected the newly formed United Terran Front to fracture, unable to cope with the enormous task of waging war against a galactic power. But they were wrong. Humanity, united by a shared sense of justice and fury, adapted in ways the Council never anticipated. Earth's first strike came not with an overwhelming assault, but with precision. The Triarchs had a vast network of relay stations, communication hubs, and strategic outposts that held their empire together. They never thought the Terrans would strike at something so subtle, so vulnerable. But that was the brilliance of humanity's strategy. The Terran fleet didn't approach with the force of a traditional military. Instead, they sent a series of small, stealthy ships, barely detectable, each carrying a payload of advanced electronic warfare devices. The ships infiltrated the Triarch communication grid, and within moments, the entire network went dark. There were no warnings, no alarms, just an eerie silence. The first relay station fell without a shot fired, then another, and another. Each one crippled, each one rendered useless, unable to send messages or coordinate reinforcements. The Council was left scrambling to figure out what had happened, but the damage was done. Their command structure had been decimated in a matter of hours. The Triarchs had always relied on their technological superiority, but they were about to learn that Earth didn't need to match them in sheer power. Humanity had something else: unpredictability, tenacity, and a knack for thinking outside the box. Every human attack was calculated, but it was always a step ahead of what the Council expected. Word of the strikes spread quickly throughout the galaxy. The Council's allies were the first to feel the ripple effect. Trade routes were interrupted. Military forces, once confident in their superiority, found themselves blindsided by a race they had once considered primitive. The universe had watched Earth's rise to power with detached curiosity, but now it watched with growing concern. The Prometheus's destruction was no longer a forgotten incident. It had become a symbol, a call to action for every human who had ever been underestimated. As the Triarchs struggled to contain the damage, humanity's influence grew. The coordinated strikes continued, each one more daring than the last. Earth's ships, though smaller and less advanced than their enemies, had learned to use their limited resources in ways that turned the tide. They fought with the efficiency of a species that had no room for error, with the knowledge that their survival was on the line. While the Council's fleets focused on protecting their borders, Earth's forces struck deeper, targeting vulnerable outposts, supply depots, and research stations. Each success sent a clear message to the Triarchs. Earth was no longer a weak, inconsequential planet. It was a force to be reckoned with. And they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to make the galaxy listen. The Triarchs, in their arrogance, believed they could contain the human uprising. But as each new strike hit its mark, they realized the truth. They had awakened a sleeping giant. And now, the galaxy would know the full force of humanity's fury. The Triarch Council's arrogance began to falter as their fleets and outposts fell one after another, victims of humanity's ruthlessness and ingenuity. The first few strikes had been enough to cripple their communication network, but now Earth was moving with terrifying precision. What had started as an isolated act of vengeance had transformed into a systematic dismantling of the Council's power structure. And the most chilling part, the Triarchs couldn't predict what humanity would do next. Earth's military was not like anything the Council had ever encountered. While the Triarchs relied on overwhelming numbers and rigid strategies, humanity fought with adaptability. Each strike was different, tailored to the weaknesses of the target. No two battles were the same. Human ingenuity shone through in every engagement, whether it was using gravity wells to hide fleets, jamming enemy systems to turn their own weapons against them, or utilizing advanced cyber warfare to infiltrate the heart of the Council's systems. Humanity had no intention of fighting a conventional war. They had no need for traditional combat methods. Instead, they fought with strategy that left their enemies in a constant state of uncertainty. The Council's commanders, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves bewildered. Every plan they devised was countered before it could even begin. Every fleet they sent out was outmaneuvered. Their ships, designed for power and dominance, were being neutralized by human forces that were faster, more agile, and willing to exploit any advantage. While Earth's tactics were unpredictable, they were also precise. The human military took every engagement seriously, ensuring that no resource went to waste. Their strikes were surgical, aimed at targets that could destabilize the entire structure of the Triarch Empire. And it wasn't just about the immediate victories. Every small success sent a ripple through the galaxy, eroding the once unstoppable aura of the Triarchs. Allies of the Council, once content to follow the Triarch's lead, began to question whether the ancient empire's reign was truly as invincible as it seemed. The Council tried to retaliate with brute force, sending vast fleets to crush Earth's forces in a single blow. But the Terran military was always one step ahead. The battles that followed were nothing like the Triarchs had expected. They didn't find an easy target. Instead, they faced fleets that knew the terrain, knew how to adapt to any situation, and above all, fought with the unshakable resolve that only comes from knowing they had nothing left to lose. Humanity's reputation for relentless persistence began to spread. The galaxy's lesser powers, once too afraid to act, began to find courage. Some offered aid, some chose to remain neutral, but all watched as Earth forced the once mighty Triarch Council to rethink their entire approach. The Triarchs had believed that humanity was too fragmented, too inexperienced to mount any real resistance. But now, they understood the truth. Humanity had a unique power, not just their technology, but their will to survive. The Council's commanders, frustrated and confused, began to realize that this was no ordinary conflict. It wasn't a war for dominance. It wasn't a war for territory. It was a war for recognition, for the respect humanity had long been denied. And it was a war they were losing. The Triarchs had underestimated Earth's ability to adapt, but now they were learning that humanity was not just a quick learner. They were relentless. Each defeat was not a setback, but a lesson. Earth's forces didn't mourn their losses. They studied them. They learned from every battle, improving their tactics with each engagement. The initial phases of the war had been filled with uncertainty, but now the humans were a well-oiled machine, their systems working in perfect harmony. Human ingenuity was no longer just a matter of military innovation. It had become a philosophy. The Terran military was composed of diverse individuals from all walks of life. Engineers, scientists, former civilians, and soldiers had come together to create a force unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Each battle tested their adaptability, and each success was analyzed and built upon. Unlike the rigid bureaucratic systems of the Triarchs, Earth's military evolved with every skirmish, with every ship lost or gained. It was as if the entire species was learning how to fight, not just as individuals, but as a collective intelligence. And Earth's forces had something else. They were unafraid of failure. Every setback was viewed as an opportunity for growth. Unlike the Triarchs, who had relied on their centuries of dominance and their fixed doctrines, humanity could change on a dime. When a new tactic worked, it was immediately incorporated into the next wave of operations. When something failed, they took notes, adjusted, and tried again. This relentless adaptability was starting to show results. Earth's fleets, once considered inferior by the galaxy's elites, began to dominate in ways the Triarchs could no longer ignore. They learned to make the most out of limited resources, using whatever they had to their advantage. Every space station they took over became a forward base for their next strike. Every captured Triarch vessel was reverse-engineered for new technologies that turned the tide further in their favor. The galaxy began to take notice. The smaller, more independent species, once hesitant to oppose the Triarchs, started to look to Earth as a symbol of defiance. The unified strength of humanity wasn't just about numbers. It was about creativity, persistence, and the ability to adapt in the face of overwhelming odds. The Triarch Council, caught in a spiral of losses, could do little but watch as their hold on the galaxy weakened. What the Triarchs didn't understand was that the true power of humanity lay not in their military might, but in their ability to evolve. The Terran war machine wasn't a fixed entity. It was alive, constantly growing, constantly learning, and never standing still. The longer the war dragged on, the more dangerous humanity became. As Earth's military presence expanded, the Triarchs realized that they were no longer dealing with a species that could be easily crushed. The fight had stopped being about retaliation. It had become about survival. And now, the Triarchs found themselves fighting for their place in the galaxy, while Earth was simply fighting to be heard. Earth was learning at an exponential rate, and the Triarchs were running out of time to stop them. The Triarchs had long prided themselves on their superiority, on their ability to control, to conquer, to dominate the galaxy. But now, they were on the defensive. Every corner of their empire was under siege. Every strategic base and relay station hit with the precision of a species that had learned how to exploit every weakness. Earth had become an unstoppable force, not through sheer strength alone, but through the relentless application of intelligence, creativity, and the will to win. The war had stretched on for months, and with each passing day, Earth's military grew stronger. Earth's fleets, once outmatched and underpowered, now fought with an unmatched ferocity and cunning. Every encounter with the Triarch forces revealed new weaknesses in their strategy, new flaws in their supposedly perfect systems. The Triarchs had believed they were invulnerable, but the human resolve had proved otherwise. But there was one obstacle still in humanity's path. The Triarchs' homeworld, Ganthar. It was the heart of their empire, the seat of their power, and it was protected by a series of deadly defense systems that made it nearly impenetrable. No one had ever dared to attack it directly. The very idea was seen as suicidal. For the Triarchs, it was their ultimate symbol of invincibility, their shining fortress that no enemy had ever breached. But humanity had something the Triarchs didn't: the determination to do the impossible. The United Terran Front knew that if they were to end the war and force the Triarchs to negotiate, they had to strike at the very core of the Empire. And so, a plan was devised. A bold, unprecedented operation that would push Earth's fleet to the limits of its capabilities. A strike force of the best and brightest from the Terran military was assembled. The mission was simple in its objective but extraordinarily difficult. Penetrate the defenses around Ganthar, destroy the central command hub, and cripple the heart of the Triarch Empire. It would be a suicide mission for most, but to the men and women who volunteered, it was the only chance to finally end the war and secure Earth's place in the galaxy. The fleet that was assembled for this operation was Earth's most advanced. Ships that had once been nothing more than civilian vessels, hastily converted into military craft, had now been outfitted with the latest technology, developed from both human ingenuity and Triarch designs. Every ship was a testament to humanity's rapid growth and relentless drive. And the crews that manned them were the best. From engineers to tacticians, from scientists to soldiers, each member of the strike force knew the risks. But they also knew that their success would be the turning point of the war. As the fleet prepared to leave orbit, Earth's leaders made a final broadcast to the galaxy. They had always believed that the voice of one planet would not be heard. But now, that voice was loud, and it would not be ignored. Today, we fight not just for Earth, the broadcast declared, but for every world that has ever been overlooked, every voice that has ever been silenced. We are humanity, and we will be heard. The Terran fleet, a symbol of everything humanity had become, began its journey toward Ganthar. The Triarchs had long thought Earth would be a footnote in galactic history, but now they were learning the hard truth. Humanity would not be erased. The galaxy would never forget the day they heard Earth's war cry. The Terran fleet soared through the vastness of space, leaving Earth's atmosphere behind as it set its course for the heart of the Triarch Empire. The mission was simple in its goal, but incredibly complex in its execution. Strike fast, strike hard, and ensure the central command hub of Ganthar fell, or die trying. Earth's forces had faced adversity before, but never on this scale. The Triarch's defense grid was formidable. Vast orbital stations and fleets of warships patrolled the space around Ganthar, creating an impenetrable fortress that had kept all would-be invaders at bay for centuries. But Earth had never been daunted by impossible odds. If anything, those odds only fueled their determination. As the fleet approached Ganthar, the first wave of Terran ships began to engage the Triarch defense perimeter. The Triarchs had expected the Terrans to launch a conventional attack. Instead, Earth's forces used their greatest asset, unpredictability. The Terran fleet moved in scattered formations, utilizing cloaking technology and decoys to create chaos within the Triarch defenses. The Triarch ships, built for overwhelming firepower and direct confrontation, struggled to adapt to the fluid tactics of Earth's forces. It didn't take long for the first major strike to hit its mark. A Terran stealth ship, specially designed for sabotage, managed to infiltrate the heart of the defense system, deploying an electromagnetic pulse that crippled a critical portion of the Triarch's fleet. The massive chain reaction that followed turned the once mighty defense grid into a chaotic mess of disabled ships and falling debris. It was only the beginning. Earth's forces pushed deeper into Triarch space, cutting through the layers of defense like a blade through paper. But they weren't stopping. As the remaining Triarch fleets scrambled to regroup, the strike force plunged into the depths of Ganthar's orbit, where the final challenge awaited: the central command hub, the source of the Triarch Empire's power. The mission's final objective was to penetrate the heavily fortified command facility and destroy the heart of the Empire's military machine. The Terran strike force launched its final assault. Ships bearing Earth's colors stormed the entrance to the command hub, exchanging heavy fire with the Triarch defenders. The Triarchs, desperate to protect their last remaining stronghold, fought back with everything they had. But the Terran resolve was too much. The sacrifices made, the blood spilled, the lessons learned from every previous battle. They all came together in that moment. The command hub was breached, and with a single devastating strike, the heart of the Triarch Empire fell silent. The galaxy held its breath as Ganthar's defenses collapsed. News spread like wildfire across the stars. The Triarchs had been defeated, their power shattered by the one species they had dismissed for so long. Back on Earth, the people erupted in joyous celebration. The Terran war cry had been heard, and it had been answered. Humanity had proven its place in the galaxy. No longer would they be ignored. No longer would they be considered weak. They had fought with every ounce of their being, and now they stood at the threshold of a new era. For the first time in history, the galaxy would listen. Earth had shown the universe that they would no longer be a footnote in the history of the stars. They had become a force to be reckoned with, a species that had not only survived, but had changed the course of history. And as the final echoes of battle faded, one thing was clear: the galaxy would never forget the day they heard Earth's war cry.